Welcome back. Do you have a picture for us?
Thank you. Sure.
Of
Are the
course.
real thing.
I know. And Cindy, I'm sorry. I saw you last night and I didn't get a chance to say
Yeah.
hi. I'm sorry.
It was a nice turnout.
It was really nice. It was really nice. This picture. This is Sadie.
Mazel tov, mazel tov.
Mazel
Congratulations.
tov. So exciting.
Mazel tov.
And I'll also just show one of the two of them.
And then she has another little girl to go to preschool with.
Yes.
Millie.
Millie. I saw Cantor Stewart this morning at drop-off. And it's just it's amazing. She's incredible and excited for Sadie and Millie to be little friends. Yeah. How's everyone else doing? I haven't seen this group all summer. How's everyone doing?
Pretty good. Lot of health issues with dear friends and family, so just I'm not getting there as much as I would like to be there, but I got to be here dealing with all of that.
Wow. Well, hoping for refuah shlema for full and speedy recoveries.
Thank you.
Looking forward to services tonight at Glazer. Should be fun.
Nice. Yes. I know, so exciting. We have services now weekly on both sides of town at Glazer and at Resnick.
Unfortunately, I can't be there. I have visitors from Israel.
Oh, wow.
Wonderful.
That's a good reason not to be there.
Yeah.
Well, I wish I could bring them with me, but I think they won't want to come.
Well, I hope they're enjoying their time here with you.
Oh, I'll be enjoying it. It's one of my favorite cousins.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Very nice. Well, I think we're going to get started, and I am going to share my screen. I just want to, okay, here we go. Okay. Is everyone able to see my screen? Okay,
Yes,
great.
I see it.
Okay, perfect. Well, it's wonderful to be with everybody. The last time I got to study Torah with this group was 3 or so months ago. So I'm looking forward to learning together today. This week's Parsha is Teitzei. So we are approaching the very, very end of Deuteronomy, of the book of Devarim. And this Parsha mostly deals with sets of laws. And it comes in the context of the previous Parsha, which was really about more public laws, communal laws, national laws. And now this week's Parsha, that was sort of the macro, and this is the micro. This week's Parsha focuses on interpersonal relationships, on the family unit, and sort of bringing those laws into the home and into a different kind of space than what we saw in last week's Parsha. So we are going to be starting with a part of the Parsha about a wayward and defiant son, in Hebrew, Ben Sorer or Moreh. And I chose to start here. This isn't the very beginning of the Parsha, but it's toward the beginning. And I chose to start here today because this is one famous example of how Jewish law and the way we live Jewishly actually changes over time. And I think this example has a lot to teach us about who we are today as Jews, where we came from, and where we see ourselves. So we are going to get into this. Before we do, can I just see a show of hands for folks who are familiar with these laws about the wayward and defiant son before we get into it? Okay, so a few and mostly it'll be new. Okay, great. Okay, we are starting with verse 18. If a householder has a wayward and defiant son who does not heed his father and mother and does not obey them even after they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his town at the public place of his community. They shall say to the elders of the town, "This son of ours is disloyal and defiant. He does not heed us. He is a glutton and a drunkard." Thereupon his town's council shall stone him to death. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. All Israel will hear and be afraid. All right. So these are 4 short verses and pack so much into them. What is standing out from these verses as I was reading them, whether it's your first time reading them or you've read them before? Yeah, Benjamin.
Thank you, Rabbi. This situation seems quite common today, even though this story is thousands of years old in the Torah. But how many times do I read in Dear Abby or wherever about these sons that just want to sit in the basement and play video games and smoke weed and not get jobs or wasting their lives? So it's a problem that is timeless, maybe is one, or at least has reemerged for today. I don't know about 1,000 years ago, but
Yeah, so there are aspects of this that we are still seeing in our society today. And I think also here it talks about specifically a son. And I think, you know, in the Torah, so much of, because it's a patriarchal society, so many of the examples that are used are about men. And at the same time, we can also imagine like plenty of us who have been rebellious or defiant or something at some point in our lives. And so we see this sort of playing out in different kinds of ways and also examples of that today. Cindy, go ahead.
Although I've been told that it never really ever happened, I see this more as a warning to the son that if you do this, your parents have this right to have you stoned to death, rather than it being something for the parents, like, oh, you could take your kid to the town council and have him stoned to death. So I see it more as a message to the child.
That's so interesting. Okay, so it's not necessarily about these aren't instructions for how one should parent. These are instructions for how one should act themselves, which definitely changes it. It's not how am I going to change somebody else's or discipline somebody else's behavior, but it's how am I going to own who I am and my own actions, knowing what the consequences might be. Nice. Susan.
So when I first heard this several years ago, and I was in a women's Torah study, we all were appalled that the parents would take the kid to, or the boy to a council and have them stoned to death. And then there were also some interesting, he's a glutton and a drunkard. So he's a wastrel. And that was kind of like humorous attached to the fact that he was a miscreant. However, it also was a pretty severe, a stringent warning that parents are like the subsidiary of God in the sense that they create life, and they are due respect, and kids should behave themselves. So that kind of is a lesson there. When you said we've come a long way, well, we certainly don't do this and have the kids stoned to death. But there are problematic children, and what do some parents do with them? There are institutions today that can help them or incarcerate them, as the case may be.
And it's interesting that you bring up the parent-child relationship here and respecting one's parent, because what the parsha ends with is that commandment. And if we have time, we'll get there and we'll look at it, but honoring one's parent. And in that instance, here we have a consequence for not honoring one's parent and not respecting one's parent. And then at the end of the parsha, we have a reward for respecting and honoring. And so that relationship and the sanctity of the parent-child relationship sort of brackets the parsha in a really interesting way. Yeah, Rebecca.
Oh, I'm going to add a twist to this discussion because respect and honor goes both ways. So we don't know if the miscreant child is acting out in this kind of fashion because the parents haven't been treating him well.
Mm-hmm. And there's so much here that could be filled in that we don't have information about. And to have a punishment like stoning this son to death is such an extreme punishment. And I think many readers see this, and I think it is shocking, especially since it talks about the mother and father bringing them. It's also interesting that the mother is included here, that it's not just the father. I think in the Torah, I would expect, the father is sort of the head of the household. It's his responsibility. But here, the mother and the father do this together. And to me, the end of this is really quite shocking. That is how harsh the punishment is. Yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
So
Sorry.
I just want to emphasize a little further because
Yeah.
you have to, I mean, in modern times and probably, I don't know why I said modern times because this has probably been going on forever. A sexual child abuse.
Yeah.
We don't know. Why is the child being punished for things that we don't really know what is going on in the household?
Right. There's so much context here that could be filled in. And that's what happens in the Torah is we don't get a lot of the side conversations. We don't get a lot of what else could have been happening. And that's where the rabbis come in. And that's also where we come in to sort of try and figure out, well, what is this saying? What could possibly be happening here? Why such a harsh punishment for this specifically?
Will you repeat your question, please?
Why such a harsh punishment for being a wayward and defiant son? The punishment could have been anything, and it's this. It's stoning them to death by the town's council.
Oh, I'm not sure, Rabbi, if I'm going to answer your question, but it does seem it's not the first. There's been some escalation because it says that they've tried to discipline the son before. So, whether it's once or twice or 10 times, we don't really know, but this is a final thing. Severe penalty, but a kid that doesn't want to do anything, that can be very frustrating to a parent.
Mm-hmm. And so it sort of gives us a bit of a trajectory of this was not the first effort. There were many more steps. Yeah, Brad.
Yeah, it seems to me that the punishment is disproportionate with the crime. Previously we learned about the eye for an eye concept, where an element of proportion was introduced into the justice system. And here it seems totally disproportionate and at odds with what we've just been told. I don't remember which comes first, the eye for an eye or this, but they do seem in opposition with each other.
Yes. So we read that and also so many other punishments. And is this one actually fitting the crime? Rebecca, did you have your hand raised also? So the rabbis, centuries later, have the same discomfort with the punishment not fitting the crime. And so I want to look at a piece of Mishnah that relates to this. But before we do, because this Parsha really focuses on laws that are within the family unit, within the household, I think that needs to be something we need to look at here also. What is the threat that the Torah is worried about in society? And I think part of that is that if there is a breakdown amongst the family unit, if a son won't even listen to his parents, then how will that son treat leaders in the society? Will that son be able to contribute or help protect or help nurture, build their own family or work or whatever it is the society needs them to do? And so in a lot of ways, I think the laws in this Parsha are trying to look at what is at stake. When different pieces can break down, what will that mean? Not just for the family, not just for one person, but what does that actually mean for all of us as a society and as a community? And I think that's something that is true of Judaism also. Judaism is so much about the community. Yes, each individual matters so much. And also, we know ourselves and as we are in relationship with others and as we exist in community. And so I want us to just keep that in mind as we continue reading, is what does the Torah see that is at stake with any of these laws? And I think here it's that if there is a breakdown within the family, there could be a larger breakdown in society, which is very threatening. So now I want to look at this piece of Mishnah. Can everybody see this piece of Mishnah that I just pulled up? Okay. So this is from Tractate Sanhedrin, which also deals with laws. The Mishnah was redacted around the year 200. It's the earliest sort of formal code of Jewish law, and it builds on the Torah. And so what we're going to see in the Mishnah is how the rabbis around that time, from about the year 0 to about the year 200, how they are interpreting and dealing with this wayward and defiant son. Okay, so I am just going to summarize a little bit. If you want, you can read it here. I'm also happy to put it in the chat if you're curious and want to read a little bit more. So the rabbis are trying to figure out, okay, who is really a wayward and defiant son? As Rebecca said, we don't get a full picture of anything in the text. And so they are now breaking it down and saying, like, well, if this person is a glutton and a drunkard, that means that he is somebody who eats this exact amount of meat and drinks this exact amount of wine. And so they sort of go through and try to define those terms very specifically about what a person would need to eat and drink in the most specific kind of way in order to be defined as a glutton and to be defined as a drunkard. And then it tries to go through, well, what is it this person even did? And then it talks about stealing property from others, both the parents and of others. Different rabbis weigh in on what that can mean. And then, because the Torah specifically talked about the father and the mother bringing this to the town council, the rabbis also are attuned to that. It's not just the father, it's the father and the mother. That must be there for a reason. And so then the rabbis are debating, well, what if the father wants to do this and the mother disagrees, or vice versa? And they sort of come up with this very specific formula of what exactly would need to happen, A to Z, for this person to even be a wayward and defiant son to begin with. Why do they go through all this trouble? And this is not the only Mishnah that deals with it. There is so much in the Mishnah and in the Talmud. I just brought a few little pieces. why are they even bothering trying to create these definitions and these formulas? What's going on? Yes, Cindy.
To basically make it impossible to be carried out.
And why don't they want it to be carried out?
Well, I don't think they really feel the solution is to kill the child.
I don't think so either. I think, like you said, they're trying to create such narrow parameters, and they're so narrow that the rabbis are basically saying, this is not possible. The scenario we have in the Torah is actually not possible at all. So in the end, it's not even about a wayward and defiant son. What might it actually be about? I'm going to go back to the text.
Following the basic rules of the Torah, some lesser level of, I don't know if the right word is obedience, or observance.
Yeah.
And I think somebody said that earlier.
Yes. An observance of these laws, being attuned to these laws. And yeah, Penina? Penina, I need you to unmute.
Okay. I think they're trying to control the fact that that person does not pay attention to the needs of others. It's not him himself of what he eats or how much he eats for himself. It's because he's going to take away from the others. So the idea is to be considerate that when you are in a situation when there is only enough for even one person, you still share. And you still have to pay attention to the needs of the other people in the family. So it's not really the food that it's really this is only an expression of one item that was important.
Thank you.
It's just the idea that you need to be considered of the rest of the people in the house.
Right.
Or the community.
Yeah, and
So,
I think that's a big piece of all of these laws is what is our relationship to one another? How are we considerate of each other? If that starts in the family unit, then this is what that might look like when it breaks down, and this is what it looks like when we are at our best. Yeah, Brad.
What troubles me about this is that it's sort of a whitewashing of the Torah.
Yeah.
And I'd rather take a different position and say, well, this was then, and we deal with these issues differently today, than trying to thread the needle here and explain it away in some way that really doesn't make sense.
And I think that takes us into the psyche of the rabbis, of the ancient rabbis, because they are trying to figure out how the Torah can make sense. For them, it is not possible that the Torah can be wrong about anything. And so they are working within that type of theology of this has to make sense no matter what. And whatever mental gymnastics is going to be required of us to do that, we are going to make it make sense. And today, I think we read this, especially in a community like Wilshire Boulevard Temple and other Reform communities, and say, this is something that is not in line with our values. It also was written at a completely different time in a completely different place. And we're able, I think, to confront the text and say, this does not align with what I believe in terms of a justice system. And for the rabbis, that was simply not an option. They had to make it work in order for their theology and their entire way of life to really continue. Yeah, Cindy, I saw your hand, and then Susan.
Yeah, now this portion doesn't go there at all, but what I would hope it would have been more what hopefully would happen in modern days, that when the family comes and says we're having trouble, instead of, well, let's kill the kid, that the family and the child might be given some help and guidance and community support. And hopefully that's how it would be treated now as opposed to then.
Yeah. And I think that's also, for me, one of the reasons why it is, I love reading these texts, even the ones that are so troubling, like this one, because it does force us to think about, okay, for us in our society today, what can we do to support this child? What can we do to support these parents? What would this look like in our community, knowing that this outcome would not be acceptable? Yes, Susan.
So, in defense of the Torah and these troubling passages, I like the fact that it's not just given to us as a point blank statement, because we have that in the Ten Commandments, which are good, but then how do we wrestle with this? And I think that's important because people forget some of the dicta, that you have to do this, you have to do that, and the like. And life is complicated, and figuring things out and burrowing beneath the surface, I think, can lead to more understanding. And what Cindy had said, I agree with it. I had said that in the beginning, that there weren't, first of all, I don't know that there were jails, other than the cities of refuge in this early society, or psychologists and social workers. And I think that was a function of rabbis coming in at the time as well. So the problem here is also, I think, as the family is a microcosm of society. And if you have troubled families, you will probably get a troubled society. So the situation here is how to deal with a wayward, a problematic youth.
And that the response is also, it's part of everybody, like you were saying, it's within the family, and it's the mother and father bringing them forward, but it's also this town council, it's also the elders of the town, it's in a public place in the community. It is involving so much more, and I agree. I love the way the rabbis dig deep into the text and treat every single letter as if it is there from God for a purpose for us to learn from. Brad, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something that I mentioned at Chevra Torah last week about prisons, and that is that prisons are a product of the Enlightenment. Prior to the Enlightenment, there was no such thing as a prison. The way you dealt with infractions was you either killed, tortured, exiled, or enslaved. But the Enlightenment brought us the concept of the prison as a place for rehabilitation of that individual. And that is the mission of today's prison, not only to incarcerate, but to rehabilitate.
Thank you.
Didn't the Egyptians have prisons? I mean, wasn't Joseph thrown in? It was the steward's prison, but it was a prison. It wasn't Enlightenment.
No, well, Joseph was thrown into a prison.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
but it was it was at the time a very temporary solution, a temporary solution to the ultimate decision, which was to exile, to kill, it wasn't perceived as a long-term type of solution.
That's so interesting. Thank you. I also, just going back to this text from the Mishnah and what it does to the text from our Parsha this week, I just want to highlight sort of structurally what's going on again, because this is the piece that I think is very relevant for us today, is how the rabbis have taken what is in the Torah. They are thinking about their own time and place. For them, the punishment does not fit the crime. They do all of these mental gymnastics, assuming that what is in the Torah is exactly what the Torah meant to say, and they are giving it their take in order to be able to share with their community of their time and place. This does not apply for this reason. It can only be in this one specific instance. That's never actually going to happen. And I think in a lot of ways, this is what we do today also. We modernize different aspects of Jewish life. We interpret things from the Torah in new ways based on our society, based on our context, based on our value system. And that tradition really begins from the rabbis around the year 0 to 200. And this wayward and defiant son is upheld as sort of the like model of that because it is so extreme. So it's interesting to sort of like have this right here for us, and we still see it in so much of what we do today as Jews, as this group knows better than anyone, you know, going through the Torah study and seeing what is here, and then what we do today in living our Jewish lives. Yeah, Rebecca.
Is it possible for you to tell me when was the Mishnah Sanhedrin written? What century?
It was written around the year 0 to around the year 200. It quotes a number of rabbis who lived during that time. It was most likely redacted around the year 200.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other comments on the wayward and defiant son before we move on to a different parts of our parsha? Yeah, Pnina, go ahead. You need to unmute.
I think they went to the extreme because the situation would be extreme. So they are trying to go tit for tat, kind of like. Yet they already had the law that says, and you shall honor your father and your mother, which means that you have to take the load on yourself. And here, the person is eating everything and he doesn't leave enough for the other people. First of all, today, by today measurements, the worst punishment that you can do, and you never do it, is avoid food, take away food from anyone as a punishment. This is the worst thing, to say you cannot have breakfast because you did this and that and that. So like we said before, there were no psychiatrists, and I don't think that they took the time to see what the results of each situation was. But definitely the rabbi that they said that that he eats everything and this was disturbed himself, because this is the first thing that you do today is to say do not keep away food as a punishment, period.
So yeah, so to clarify, what the rabbi was saying was like, not that person shouldn't be fed, but rather like this is the specific amount. And I don't think it was specifically talking about you know, that person's actual intake of food. I think it was more so just trying to create something so narrow that wouldn't actually be possible, and just like was sort of part of being formulaic in that way. Yeah, Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, Rabbi, I wanted to ask about the story of the prodigal son. Is that a New Testament thing?
Yeah, that's not in the Hebrew Bible.
Is that a response then to this in terms of showing mercy? You know, the Christian emphasis on mercy rather than justice.
That's so interesting. I've never thought about that because it's not in the Hebrew Bible. So maybe, yeah, maybe it is. That's really interesting. Now I'm curious to look more into that. Thank you. Okay, so we are going to finish up chapter 21. We are at verse 22. So now this is a completely different law. We have moved on. If any party is guilty of a capital offense and is put to death, and you impale the body on a stake, you must not let the corpse remain on the stake overnight, but you must bury it the same day. For an impaled body is an affront to God. You shall not defile the land that your God is giving to you to possess. Okay. I think the laws around death in the Torah are really interesting because we have so much of what we do today around death based on these particular laws. And that's one of the things that I love about Torah study so much is seeing our own practice today actually in the text. And it's so funny because we're coming right after the Ben Sorer Moreh, the wayward and defiant son, which can never ever happen in any kind of society and never ever within Judaism. And now moving on to something that actually there are pieces of this that we still do today. So reading these two verses, does anybody see anything in here that is related to death that we still preserve in some way in our own Jewish practice?
Burying quickly.
Right.
They're burying very quickly, exactly. Not letting it remain overnight. And in this case, burying it the same day. In practice today in Judaism, we try to bury as soon as we can. Usually it's not the same day simply because it's not practical, not because it's trying to be delayed. There's also, of course, a respect in Judaism for making sure that any family members or friends who need to come in for a funeral or burial or something like that are able to be present. But this is exactly what we do today. We try to make sure that it is a way of respecting the dead and honoring the dead by protecting their body and giving their body a quick burial. I also, oh yeah, Susan, go ahead.
Well, I have a question. I mean, I was going to say the same thing. We're supposed to bury them quickly, and then also it's public humiliation too.
Yes.
If you have the dead body hanging there, and you know, I mean, it decays. Horrible. But I've always had a question about this too, with exalted politicians or the queen or something, and people lying in state. So that now the Jews fortunately don't have that, but I've always thought the dead person can't see back to you, and he's being the eyes are going all over the dead person, even though they're often embalmed and have makeup and made to look good. But some of that practice has come back to some Judaism, where the deceased is dressed in the clothes. I mean, that's happened in the family, and I always thought that's kind of almost ghoulish. So, what is your take on that?
Well, I think there are two pieces of it. One, the ability to see the body after the person has died, which is not something that happens in Jewish communities. Again, sort of coming back to this, of honoring that person and honoring their body. And then I think the other piece is the allowing community members to pay respect to a dedicated communal leader. I think that part does feel Jewish. That I remember Ruth Bader Ginsburg, her casket. I don't know how. I think it was in the Capitol. I don't know how long it was there for, but I think in Judaism, we do want to pay respect at the same time. And so because the casket stayed in that space where respect was being paid, it wasn't a delay of the burial. Does that make sense?
It does. The casket is one thing, and that is acceptable, but to have an open casket.
Right, is
people are
completely,
gawking at the
right, is
deceased.
not a Jewish value.
Right.
Right, yeah, it does not exist. And it comes back to these verses, exactly. Yeah.
I think Isaac Bashevis Singer, when he died or something, was had a big casket and there was a procession, and that's fine. You're paying
really?
respects to them,
Right.
but you're not gawking at them when they can't look back.
And the language of it being an affront to God, I mean, in this case, it's very specific to an impaled body, but I think it could apply to any body, is that like that gawking seems to be an affront to God as well. And I think bringing God into it and God's feelings into it is an interesting piece of this, that one, we're assuming we're making assumptions about what God thinks and about what God feels in this specific instance. And that is an affront, that the system of not respecting somebody's body, not honoring somebody's body is so bad that it is an affront to God. Yeah, Pnina. Oh, wait, you need to unmute.
There is a lot of laws that were written all through the years, not only in the Bible. The question is how many of them really and truly became something that people do today that were proved to be working and humanitarian and things like that. All these things that were written, every rabbi in his time, at one time, especially in the beginning of the printing or the writing or the mail or whatever you want to call it, transferring information, people could write whatever they want. I just want to know which part of it is really something humane, something healthy, and something that people really will benefit or had a chance to see whether it works or not. A lot of stuff could be printed. People print today.
Wait, are you talking about the Mishnah that we read?
It doesn't matter. The Mishnah is not the Bible.
Okay. Wait, I want
It's
to make
not
sure
the
we're
Bible.
focused.
Excuse me. Let me finish the sentence. The Mishnah was not the Bible. Mishnah was printed and written according to the times that those rabbis lived in, and the way that they were educated, and the way that their family life was. So I think that I rather take the portion of the Bible and read it and try to translate it instead of going to the Mishnah. We are in a Bible session.
I understand.
Yes.
That was the only piece of Mishnah I wanted to bring. For me, it really does illuminate a system for us of better understanding the text. I also want to make sure that we can move on. There are a couple other verses and a few other laws that I want to make sure we get to. So we are going to begin at chapter 22. You know what? I think we are going to skip. Okay. We're going to skip to verse 5. Verse 5 is a very famous verse. A woman must not put on a man's apparel, nor shall a man wear woman's clothing, for whoever does these things is abhorrent to your God. Does anybody know how this verse has been used today or in modern times?
Oh, yeah.
Anti-trans, anti-gay.
Yeah, so part anti-trans, anti-gay, also anti-women wearing a talit or putting on tefillin, wearing pants, things like that. So this is a verse that is often quoted, so I wanted to make sure that we got to it. And I wanted to share a piece of text from Rabbi Abby Stein. Rabbi Abby Stein, I think she She is one of the first out trans rabbis. She lives in New York, and she came to speak to our community at Columbia Barnard Hillel after she wrote her first book. She grew up Hasidic in Brooklyn and now lives in a different part of Manhattan, has completely left the community that she grew up in and where she was ordained as a rabbi. So I thought that, especially coming from her perspective and her learning and history, I wanted to share a little bit about how she sees this verse. She writes, the Talmud says that what is prohibited is falsifying identity for the purpose of spying on the other sex. The great medieval commentator Rashi says that the prohibition is limited to concealing identity for the purpose of adultery. The prohibition is limited to concealing identity for the purpose of adultery. And then she goes on to explain, so that was in the Talmud, and then the Shulchan Aruch, which is even today the code of Jewish law. It's a medieval code of Jewish law, but it's the code of Jewish law that is still used today. The Shulchan Aruch notes that cross-dressing is permitted on Purim because the purpose is celebration or joy, but that it's forbidden for the purpose of fraud. So similar to what we were looking at with the wayward and defiant son, Rabbi Stein shows us that the rabbis are doing the same thing with this verse of they are trying to create a scenario in which they are explaining this is where it is permitted and this is where it is forbidden. It is forbidden for a woman to put on man's clothes for purposes of adultery or fraud. So to commit some sort of crime. And I think, we've been talking about context a lot here and reading between the lines and trying to understand. I think, this is one small verse that is used in so many different ways in different communities today. And I think this reading, to understand what it means to us as Jews today, I think it really is important to bring in the voices of rabbis from the Mishnah, medieval rabbis from the Shulchan Aruch, and our own voices, because it illuminates a different aspect of what this is Jewishly. Of course, the Torah is our foundation, and our tradition as Jews is a history of thousands of years of text and culture and tradition. So I thought that was an interesting way, sort of bringing it back to what we were looking at before and now with this verse, something sort of similar. Yeah, Brad.
Rabbi, what do you make of the fact that the punishment isn't detailed as opposed to the wayward son?
That's interesting that it's really more about God's view of that. I think it's interesting that it seems more like something that's private, maybe because it's between a person and God. I'm not sure. I think that's interesting. Other like the Hebrew for abhorrent is toeva, and here the phrase is toavat Adonai. And so that same word of toeva is used in the verse about sex between two males. And so like the language with gender, I think it might be replicating that. And I think that is another example of, like we were talking about today, the Torah being written in one time and place, and our own value system and the time and place we live in today, and Jewish text and tradition over time evolving to look different than the way the verse is on the surface. Yeah, Susan.
So I think that Brad raised an interesting question, but I would say this is more private. How much is it disrupting the social order, whereas a defiant, rebellious son, it could be a criminal,
Right.
and then he's encroaching on others. So I'm trying to lower my hand. There we go. Yeah,
Nice.
I think there's a distinction between the acts and those that are, I mean, we have that in our society too, with between a misdemeanor and a felony, but also between what's more of a private act, even though they may be out in public, but a disruptive and criminal and act that inflicts harm on others. Like
yeah, I like that distinction between an action, that can impact others in a different way. And it's interesting. It's like, I think every single person you talk to might interpret it a little bit differently. And maybe it's trying to sort of keep things that are private and maybe even related to gender in a more private sphere. I want to make sure that we keep going because we started with the relationship between parents and children. Penina, I see your hand. I'm so sorry, but I want to make sure we end so that we can bracket our session in this very specific way. I really apologize. Thank you. So I just want to get to verses 6 and 7. Okay, so verse 6 and verse 7. These are also very famous verses. What a great parsha this week. If along the road you chance upon a bird's nest in any tree or on the ground with fledglings or eggs, and the mother sitting over the fledglings or on the eggs, do not take the mother together with her young. Let the mother go and take only the young, in order that you may fare well and have a long life. So this reward of having a long life is where I wanted to bring it back to the beginning, because the only other place in the Torah that we see that piece of having the reward of having a long life is, does anybody know? One other place in the Torah. Honoring one's parents is the only other commandment in the Torah for which you receive the reward of a long life. Why are these two commandments, especially given, again, bracketing this parsha and the relationships, why are these commandments linked to a long life? Yeah, Susan.
I love you bringing this up, but and it's a good question. It makes my brain spin. But could it be that they're honoring the mother bird? And I had never thought of that. I thought of the consequences and what happens in what is a story in the Mishnah or the Talmud that well, first of all, it didn't make total sense to me because the mother may see you, whether the mother sees or not, the eggs are gone. So the mother is bereft. And I don't know how that totally helps the mother, but your comparison that you brought up, I think, is great. And then there's a story that a father told the son to go up and take the eggs and leave the mother. And the son fell down from the tree and died. So what was the good of that? And that also, didn't that lead one of the rabbis to become a heretic?
Yes.
Rabbi Abuya, because that was so disturbed him, this piece that the son died doing what was his father asked and the Torah commands. So how do you explain that?
So thank you for bringing that up. So the story that Susan is referring to is from the Talmud, and it brings together the two commandments for which the reward is a long life. One, honoring your parents by listening to the father to go up, and the other, to let the mother bird go and only take the young. So the little boy is fulfilling both and then gets the opposite of a long life. And it is one of the most famous stories in the Talmud because it theologically just doesn't work. How is it that we can have these commandments, be promised these rewards, and that could happen, and especially given the example of it being a young boy. And I think that also brings it back to that wayward and defiant son. It is the exact opposite of that. It is a son, it is this young boy, and it is somebody who is following every law in the Torah and following what their parents say. To me, there's something in this parsha with this bracket that also says we can all do our best. We can try following these laws, observing these laws, creating the systems of justice that we believe in. And life is hard, and life is unexpected, and life doesn't so neatly fall into these brackets. And so I think even within this context of this parsha, trying to create an order within society, I think there's also an acknowledgement of we can try to create order in so many ways, and we also recognize that life does not always follow in order, that often there is chaos, and that we are able to live in that and hold that. Yeah, Brad.
You know, a couple weeks ago, we were reading about the tree in front of a besieged city that you're not supposed to axe down because that tree can continue to bear fruit. Is that the same message here with the mother who will continue to bear children?
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way. I really like that. I think it's like yes. I think it's like yes and yes. The most common reading of this commandment is so that the mother doesn't see her children being taken away. And like a way, sort of like what Susan was saying, of honoring like the dignity of the mother in that way, in like a weird, twisted way. But I prefer your reading. Rebecca?
Is there a Haftorah portion for this parsha?
Yes, there is a Haftorah. So every parsha has a Haftorah. I don't remember what the Haftorah is for this week.
Can look it up. Thank you.
Yeah, I can look it up.
I was just curious what the Haftorah might be saying about the reward.
I don't know if the Haftorah, let me see. I don't know if the Haftorah is even linked to that part of the parsha.
Yeah, Torah of consolation, it says, from Isaiah.
Oh yeah, that's right. It's Isaiah.
Yeah, I just looked it up in my Torah.
Right.
And it's from Isaiah, who echoes Hosea about marriage, which doesn't have anything to do with the birds.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. We are almost at time. So I want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you all for learning together today. I love learning with all of you.